When the Torah recounts the story of the spies, there's one person who really stands out, and that's Kalev. After the initial volley or verbal volley back and forth, we find Yehoshua also stands together with Kalev against these other spies. But there's a verse which is really interesting and a tradition which our commentators, especially Rashi, tells us. The verse reads, it says, Vayavo vayitur et haaretz, they, in the plural, came and they spied or toured the land. Vaya'alu banegev, they, in the plural, went up from the south. Vayavo ad Chevron. And then it switches to the singular, and he came to Chevron. So Rashi over here tells us that it was only Kalev. Kalev went to pray by the graves of the matriarchs. Kalev prayed because he was afraid that he would be enticed by the others, and therefore he separates, and he prays, and therefore in the singular. There are a couple of things which are interesting about this. One is we have a really similar phenomenon back in Sefer Shemot, in Parshat Yitro, in chapter 19, Perek Yutet. Vayesu merafidim, vayavo midbar Sinai, vayichad sham keneged ahar. So the whole first part of the verse was in the plural. They traveled, they arrived. But then it speaks in the singular, as if it were he encamped. And there Rashi reports this wonderful teaching, Ki'ish echad b'lev echad. They were like one man with one heart, which is wonderful. So why in Shemot does Rashi understand it in one way, the switch from the plural to the singular, and over here Rashi understands it differently? And obviously one would say that the answer is that this is two completely different stories. There was Mount Sinai. We received the Torah as a people, as one people. We accepted it. And over here, the story of the spies, we actually see afterwards this conflict. They're not of one mind. They're not of one heart. There are different and conflicting narratives as to what they saw and what they experienced and what the future would be. But part of what's interesting is the response that Kalev offers to the others. They end up saying that the cities are too fortified, they're too strong. And they say it's all for naught. We can't possibly go there. And Kalev's response is quite informative. Kalev silences them. Vayahas Kalev et ha'am el Moshe. He silences them, presumably to listen to Moshe. Some understand that it was a feigned response to attack Moshe. But then he says what's really decisive. Vayom alo na'aleh. He says, we will go. We can rise up. We're going to go. Alo na'aleh. I'm going to skip the next two words, what he says, and read the end of the verse. Ki yachol nuchala. Because we can do it. So what were the words that I skipped? V'yarashnu ota. The word yarashnu literally means an inheritance. V'yarashnu ota. We will inherit the land. So what is it that Kalev actually said, and what is it they actually believed, and how is it that his narrative is so different from the others? First of all, we see, at least the way it's described here in Bamidbar, there's no mention of God. Of course, the God who split the sea, and the God who did the plagues, and the God who gave them mun to eat for breakfast that morning, that God can do all kinds of things. There's no mention of God. So their analysis that we by ourselves can't do it, and even that was not proper. They could have come back and said that it's well fortified. That doesn't mean that we can't do it. That means we need more planning. That means we need more strategy. That means we need more practice. We need more training. We need perhaps all kinds of things. But still, even though they overstated their argument, they missed the main point. And that's what Kalev says, that we will inherit this land. And when you say the word inherit, there are a lot of things implied. First thing implied, that it's really ours. We have a right to it. But inherit means that you've inherited from someone. Who you inherited from? You inherited from your ancestors. This means that Kalev understands that God, notice, God just entered into the story, entered into the narrative, that God gave this land to the Jewish people. Who did he give it to? He gave it to Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov, which means this beautiful Midrash, which is cited by Rashi, how Kalevi goes up to Hebron and he prays by the graves of the patriarchs. He feels this connection with the patriarchs and the matriarchs. He feels connected to the past. It's actually in his words. V'yarashnu ota, we will inherit it, which means he believes that God gave the land to the forefathers. He believes that the land is ours, and therefore he uses the word Yerusha. We will inherit it. Later on in the Torah, I would say, I'm afraid to say every, but as far as I can tell, almost every time, where the Torah speaks about entering the land and conquering the land and taking the land, it uses the word Yerusha. You will inherit this land. You only use the word inherit as if you're inheriting it from someone. This is our legacy. This is what's promised. So if you choose to take the Midrash that Rashi tells us in a literal sense, that's perfectly fine. But don't only take it in a literal sense. That Midrash conveys a teaching which is actually in the text itself. Kalev, unlike the others, feels a connection to the patriarchs. In the Midrash, he goes and he prays there. In the text of the Torah itself, which I think undoubtedly is what this Midrash is based on, he says, we will inherit this land. Just finish the sentence now, or the unstated part of the sentence. We will inherit this land, which God promised to Avraham. The visual for that is Kalev praying by the grave of Avraham. His words are, we will inherit the land.